Hello, my name's Kim. At the beginning of this year, I said that there were 25 books that I was going to read in 2025. It is November 18th today, and I have read 13 of them. Caveat, one of them was a DNF, but I'm counting it as marked off the list. So we are a month and a half away from the end of the year, and there are quite a few books left on this list. And so, obviously, I want to read some of them. And so, that is the aim in this video. I'm not trying to hit the full 25. I realise now it was unrealistic of me. There's a video a couple of months ago where I was like, I'm going to do 26 books in 2026. I'm probably not. I'm probably going to do 20. And even that, I'm struggling at the minute to think of books that I want to put on that list. So it might be even less than that, and maybe that's going to be more manageable. But this video is going to have a handful of books. I'm not entirely set on what my TBR is actually going to be yet. I have a couple that I definitely want to get to, and then the rest we'll just have to see. The first, and probably the most obvious one to everyone in my life, is Babel, R.F. Kuang. I put this off for years. It is Sprayed Edges. It literally, I got it when it came out, which was when? 2022. I've owned this for 3 years. My sister's read it, my friends have read it. I have now also read Catabasis. So the kind of aversion that I had to picking this up, like the intimidation, has kind of worn away after reading Catabasis, and so I definitely want to get to this one. I'm not intimidated by it, but I still think it's going to be quite dense, probably a little bit denser than Catabasis was, even though that in its own way is very literary, dark academia. But this is obviously something that I do need to finish. I do want to dedicate a good chunk of time to it, and maybe sit down across a weekend and maybe really get started with it, because it is so big. But that is one of the things that I will definitely be reading in this video. We also have a couple of sequels on the list, one of them being A Drop of Corruption by Robert Jackson Bennett. I read The Teddy Cup last year and I really liked it. I gave it 4 stars. I've heard really good things about the sequel, and I just didn't have the chance to pick it up. I was reading other things and I just wasn't feeling in the immediate mood to read it. And so I do want to finish this one, because if there's one thing that I am bad at, it is keeping on top of reading series. And so I definitely need to do this one. In a similar vein, The Strength of the Few has just been released, so I want to pick that one up too. Because that world is so vast and complex, I definitely know that I need to stay on top of that series. I don't have a physical copy. I think I'm going to get a digital copy, just because I think it's going to be easier for me to get it. So I'm going to keep an eye out. I have a library hold on for it, but there's no way it's going to come in time. So I might buy myself the ebook and get to that. I also want to read a non-fiction, because I have lacked in reading non-fiction this year. I kind of set a soft goal of maybe reading one a month, and I've absolutely not done that. One of the non-fiction books I had on my 2025 was Black Victorians, Hidden History. I was going to try and pick this up during October, which was Black History Month in the UK, and I just didn't end up getting around to it. And so I want to get through this one. This one tells kind of really short chapters based on all of these specific figures who all represented kind of different realms of what it was like to be Black and also Victorian. And so I think this one will be really easy to dip in and out of. So I'm definitely going to start this one. And then I have a couple of other options. I have some other sequels, some of which I'm kind of saving for videos, and so I probably won't pick. I also have some more non-fiction as well. Nothing immediately else is jumping out to me. If I want to read anything, I want to read those 4 books. So that's the plan. Will I read other things? Maybe. We can see what essentially I'm tempted by. The goal is to get this up before Christmas, so I want to round off the year having read it. So I'm giving myself about a month to get through as many of these as I'm interested in picking up as possible, but there's no real pressure to finish it, and so I'll share back in with you when I make a start on whichever one I decide to pick up first. It's one of those weeks where I don't have much chance to do a lot of anything, but I have read about 120 pages of Black Victorians. Each chapter focuses on a different Black Victorian, most of whom are people who you're likely not to have heard of. We set the scene in the first 2 chapters talking about why this book came to fruition, the cultural context of what it was like to be Black in the Victorian era. There's obviously famous faces, Mary Seacole for example, and a few of the chapters in here do reference people that I have heard of at least, but I'm someone who has studied history, and so for the typical person who hasn't got an interest in history, then they might not have known who these people are. The first few chapters focus specifically on this place called Broadmoor, which was a mental institution, and so it talks about a series of different men who ended up in that institution, whether it be because of crime, whether it be because of disability, a couple of other reasons, that they were essentially forced to end up there. And so it's obviously interesting to see the very few records that we do have, because they are obviously medical records, and it kind of falls the same for many different people across history. The history is written by the victors, all of this sort of thing, and so it's not often that we get a lot of in-depth detail about these people unless somehow they have been educated and been able to write specifically what it is that they were going through, and so on like that. The next chapter that I looked at has started to look at Black aristocracy, and so we look at Sarah Forbes Bonetta, who is someone I had heard of before, and you might have seen her too, specifically online. You've probably seen a picture talking about Queen Victoria's relationship with a young black girl, and also her relationship with other people of colour as well, who which I'll get onto that in a minute. That chapter I wasn't entirely new to the information that it was shared with me. I wasn't familiar with, you know, the essence of her life story, but I knew that she did have a relationship with Queen Victoria and that they kept in contact across the years, and so it was really interesting to get a bit more information about that. I also learned that Queen Victoria had a lot of relationships with the Maharajas of India, because obviously the British Empire meant that so much was going on there, and they were deposing a lot of the Maharajas, and one of the Maharajas' daughters ended up being one of the suffragettes, and I never heard that before, considering how many times, especially in the British curriculum at school, the suffragettes are taught. I did not know that there were people of colour who were suffragettes. That is not focused on at all, and she's a really famous one as well, and I'll put a picture here somewhere of a book that was written on her, which would be really interesting picking up now, because I'd never heard of her before I read this. I have about 150 pages left, and there are a couple of other people, like I said, who I vaguely know. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, or is it the other way around, because there's the two of them. There's also Fanny Eaton, who I've definitely heard of before as well. And so there's a couple of Samuel Coleridge Taylor. I keep getting it mixed up. I need to try and get in my head how to differentiate between the two, but I always get them mixed up. So I'm planning to read a little bit more of this and kind of trickle through it. I haven't really picked up anything else. I did read the first 50 or so pages of A Drop of Corruption, but it was more that I'd forced myself to read, because I just haven't been able to read a lot at the moment, and so I just kind of sat down and read a little bit, and I'm going to pick it up, but when I'm back in the mood for it. So I'll let you know my updates when they come. It's a 3-day weekend for me, which means I have plenty of time to read, so I am aiming to start and finish this weekend. I know a bit about what happens in this book. I know it's centered around language. I know the main character is called Robin, and he goes to Oxford, and the whole story is about colonialism and all those sorts of things. I know a little bit of a plot point, because a friend who's read this, and we had a bit of a discussion, because they've been desperate for me to read this so they can talk about a specific thing that happens in the book, and so I don't know much more about it than that. I know that there's footnotes. I know that there is a character, actually I think I'm getting that mixed up with a different book. Is there a character called Letty, or is that there is a character called Letty. I couldn't remember if it was this or the Atlas 6. I know there's a character called Letty, and I think she's just not a good person. I don't know much more. It is about 500 and something pages. Yeah, just about 530 pages. It's completely doable for me to read this weekend, as long as I actually make an attempt to read something every single day. I have time today, I have time tomorrow, I have a little bit of time on Sunday, and so I want to get through this. Like I said before, I was really apprehensive about picking this up, I think because it is such a well-loved book by so many people, and I don't know about anyone else, but I just get such an aversion to that sort of thing. It's like the hype almost gets too much, and I want to reject like consuming it because everyone loves it, like it's overwhelming, because what if I don't love it? Or what if it's like, you know, it's just such a big thing that I just get put off by picking things up, and I do that with a lot of like books and things like that as well. But I literally picked this up when it came out. I specifically wanted this edition with like the black sprayed edges. Not that I think that they're that great, and like you can kind of see that like, they don't hold up that well at the time. But I was like, yeah, I want to get this book. Everyone's talking about this book. And I picked it up when it was released, and then it sat on my shelf for literally years. My sister borrowed it last year, I think, and read it early this year. And so I kind of don't feel like I have an excuse anymore, especially now that I've read Catabasis. Like, reading that, I picked that one up first because I thought that I would really like that. The concept of two people in academia who are going down and travelling to hell together, it's just something that I knew that would appeal to me. And they are set, it's set with the characters being slightly older, whereas I think Robin in this is slightly younger. But Catabasis was fine for me, but like that was it. I think it just kind of took me aback because I was like, I'm gonna really like this book. You know, R.F. Kuang is such a big author, like this will be a really great entry point for me. And it was a good entry point because it made me think, actually, why was I so afraid of reading this when I could just pick the book up, it will be fine. But I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I did. So I think my expectations for this have kind of lowered, not in the sense that I won't enjoy it, but just in the sense that like I have read one of her other books and I just thought it was okay. So I don't need to be so in my own head about reading this book. It's just like I can't explain it. I don't know if anyone else feels the same way about books, or like really popular books, but I literally, it's like a decision paralysis about picking it up. So that's the plan this weekend. I'm gonna read, hopefully, I mean, if I start sooner rather than later, and I try and do like 150 pages ish today, and I don't want to like overwhelm myself, but it depends on how much I enjoy it, because if I enjoy it and I keep reading, I'm just going to keep reading as well. I literally don't have that many plans today. I'm going to tidy up because my room's a mess. I'm probably going to go do a bit of shopping with my mum, and so I think 150 pages is reasonable for me today. That's my soft goal. I'll update you when I make some progress, maybe a little bit later tonight. And otherwise, this is what's happening. We're getting through this together. I mean, well, I'm getting through this. You've probably already read it. Everyone else has. As I hoped, I've managed to get 154 pages in to Babel. Tower of Babel. I know that there's debate on that. I don't know, it's the Babelites, I don't know. If it's the same with Catabasis. My thought so far is that this is so much easier to read than Catabasis was. I am reading this and I'm thinking, what about this is intimidating? Because although there's a lot of discussion about language, and that in itself can feel a little bit like dense, I think that the difference is that Robin is new to this world, and so we are learning for the first time as he is as well, whereas Alice and Peter in Catabasis were fully deep in the world of everything that they did, and so we were jumping into things that they already knew, and so it just was a little denser, I think, to read. I also think that Catabasis was so much more literary, whereas this reads so much more as a fantasy, and so I just think it's a lot easier to read. Like, I've read 150 pages in maybe the last hour and a bit, and to be honest, I'm just taking a break because I'm a bit tired from reading for that long straight, but I probably will go back and read maybe another couple of chapters tonight because I'm liking it so far. My kind of like two comments are, one, the footnotes. I know that people, I think, have spoke about the footnotes before. I understand that there are some things that they provide extra context for, but I kind of don't necessarily see the point in them, because the context is not always, it's like, you know, a commentary about how Robin feels about something or how someone else feels about something, but I don't necessarily think at this point it adds a lot to what is being said that couldn't have been said in the text. It does make a difference in the sense, I think, that this is obviously about academia and language, and so having footnotes kind of, I guess, matches it, almost feeling like it's a written text itself that's being translated and has those footnotes. But I'm not super sure about them so far. And then character-wise, we have our characters. We have this world of silver, which I think is really interesting, and I'm kind of intrigued to learn more about that, and I know we'll learn more about it as Robin gets more involved in it, specifically with this specific thing that he has going on. It's really interesting to me that I've managed to avoid basically the entire plot of this book up until fairly recently. Again, I spoke to my friend about it and they spoiled a light thing for me, and gave me some information about it, but before then, genuinely, all I knew that this was to do with was language. I did not know anything else, and that Robin existed as a character, and that he was mixed, and that he was coming to England, and like that was it. So there is so much more that goes on here. Genuinely, I'm liking this way more than Catabasis, and so it's really interesting, I think, the kind of difference between them. Yeah, I'm going to read a little bit more tonight. I think it's about 8 o'clock, but I want to take a break because my eyes are a bit tired, so I'm going to do some editing, and maybe watch a few videos and then pick up a little bit more, and I'll check in with you next time I read them. Something I was going to say is it's actually quite funny that I'm reading these 2 books simultaneously, because this is set in the Victorian period in Britain, and this is obviously talking about black people in the Victorian period in Britain, and so it is kind of interesting seeing I mean, I know a little bit of the wider context. Like I said, I'm a history student. I have done plenty of my own kind of independent research as well, and also obviously studied the different time periods and stuff specifically surrounding British history through my degree and everything, but kind of like the difference between the two, because this focuses a lot on opium wars and China, and this obviously talks a lot about contemporary kind of British attitudes to people of colour and all the kind of other things that are going on as well. All I have to say is that I finished Babel. I don't know what my thoughts are. I think this is so much easier to read than Catabasis. It's like I said, this just feels more like a fantasy novel, and in a way it is really slow, but it didn't feel that way. We move from Robin being found when he's young, or found when he's young, and go through his study whilst he's at Oxford, and it takes you through the kind of first 4 years of his study, and the first 3 years happen in the space of like 150 pages maybe, and so we have a lot of things that are kind of condensed into like like half the book essentially. And so we have development of him, and the people around him, and his understanding of Babel, the tower, and all the things that go on inside, the understanding, or his kind of lack of understanding about the world, because he is a little bit infatuated with Babel and what is going on there, and he isn't willing to put himself at risk, because he thinks that he needs to continue doing what he is doing and not being disruptive to what is going on to survive. And so it's quite interesting, and I think the first half really focuses on that, but there's a turning point where he no longer holds that opinion anymore, around the kind of like 60% of the way through the book, and his opinion changes, and with that comes a very rapid spiral. I read about 30% of the book yesterday as well. I got up to about 60 something percent, and so I read the rest of it this morning, and that final chunk of the book went by so quickly, and yet at the same time felt like the longest stretch. We have, mild spoilers, I guess I should say, kind of from this point going on. I feel like most people have read the book though, so maybe, but just to kind of caveat that, there ends up being a very short burst of violence, and then there's a strike, and in a way I'm glad that there is a strike, because I think striking especially is so representative of British understandings of revolution, specifically surrounding the working class and things like that. The fact that there was a strike and the Babelites are working alongside people who are striking was good. I like that. I liked that unification. And then we have the ending, where the time that they were on strike, the strike obviously kept on going on, and I feel like it's a strike. Like, there is limited things that are going to happen in that time period, but then the end happens like that. And my kind of like one thing, I guess, with the characters in this book is that I don't feel like some of them were super defined. Even Robin, the first part of the book, he is very placid. He doesn't, like I said, he doesn't really want to make disruption, and there is very little, I would say, about the characters within the book that are defining features for them. Kind of sometimes that's apart from their race, really. There's not a massive lot of things, and because so much of their relationship in the first half of the book is we see moments of them together, but because it spans 3 years, we are not spending all of our time with them the way that we would if this was a longer book or a series or whatever, or if we just started at some point later on and we were more, you know, if we just maybe skipped the first like 100 or so pages and had maybe flashbacks to Robin being young and how he was raised and spending our kind of core amount of time at the school building those relationships, because they felt like kind of surface level. Like it felt like the cohort was the cohort and everyone within the cohort kind of kept to themselves, and then after that, like, that was it. I don't know. So that final stretch of the book where several things happen in such quick succession, again, mild spoilers, we lose a character, another one betrays them, which I knew that was coming, and then we have these other two characters who both make their own choices about the ways that they are going to go in the world, and Robin's choice in particular, like for his character, in a way I get it. He has experienced so much loss, and he has obviously grown over the course of the book, specifically after that turning point midway where he's involved in something quite serious, and that turns the kind of tide for the characters and how they feel about everything that's going on. But it just still feels like such a rapid change for him to then get to the conclusion that he does at the end of the book and for it to end that way. Do I get why so many people love it, and do I recommend it as a book to read? Yeah, absolutely. But I don't know if it was my favourite. And I think character-wise, I just like the characters specifically. I just don't feel like I was attached to them really, because there was just so much time passed. I do wonder what it would have been like if it was maybe 2 books where we had even up at, like, you know, if you split the book in half and have so much more time developing the relationships of the kids at school, and them and everything that they're going through, and understanding all this stuff about Silver, because Silver and the kind of world of magic in this and the language around it is the most interesting thing about this book. Don't get me wrong, that magical system is one of the most creative ones I've seen, and I really do like that about this book. But I think the characters were what has been the letdown for me in this. Way better than Catabasis. Post reading Catabasis, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to pick up another R.F. Kuang book outside of Babel, because obviously I want to read it, but I'm glad to have read this, and I think I would consider reading more of her other work, but I think it does have to be fantasy work and not, I mean, Catabasis still was fantasy, but like it's more literary fantasy for me, I think, whereas this is fantasy. And so I don't know if I'll pick up The Poppy War, and I know that her like future work that she's coming out with is more literary, so I'm kind of just gonna wait and see, I guess. But I finally read it. It took me 3 whole years. This is an 8.5-minute clip. I don't know, it was a kind of wild read, I think. I did not need to have been so averse to reading this for so long. I do think that it is such a, I mean, it's such a big book, physically, and you know, in the book world, and it is a big book for a reason. I think that it is a solid read. It's just, I think character wise, it kind of was a little bit of a letdown for me, but actual magic system wise, I really love that. I'm a sucker for interesting magic systems, and I think that this one was really interesting. Yeah, I feel like that's all I'm going to say about it. I have about I think I have about 40 pages left of Black Victorians now, because the end is mostly references and stuff like that. So I'm definitely going to finish this today. I'm going to make an effort to sit down and read it. And then for this video, I only really have 2 other books in mind. As I mentioned, I have A Drop of Corruption and I have The Strength of the Few. I think I'm going to start with A Drop of Corruption. I was not in a very reading mood last week when I tried to pick it up, and so I am going to try and make my way through that this week, and then A Strength of the Few I think is going to be my closer for this video, although I did say I was giving myself a month to try and read as many of the 25 and 2025 books as possible, and today is the last day of November, so I technically still have like 20 plus days, so we'll see if I feel up to picking up any of the other books on my 25 and 25. I have some of them readily available. Quite a few of them are looking at me from my shelf right now. And so I have the time. I would be remiss to not attempt to try and pick something up. But I'll decide that later, I think. I officially finished Black Victorians. I'm giving it a 4-star. Once again, coincidental fact that I read these both at the same time. But if you haven't read Babel, or you want some more historical context specifically about Britain, this touches on a little bit more than Britain, because obviously a lot of the people who were black in that period were enslaved, and so we're looking at people who've come over from America to Britain and people who've made a life in America, but it specifically looks at how they had engagement with Britain versus America, and the difference in abolition movements, and how everything kind of obviously still existed in Britain as racist, but in a different capacity to that it did in America, and how there were so many different free black people who came over to Britain to give talks on what they had been through, something that I didn't realise, and even as someone who studied history, I still learned quite a bit from this book. It's written by an African American black researcher and a British white historian, and they have collaborated together. There's a lot of context in that first section about what they decided to collaborate on this project, and so that provides you a bit of insight into why they decided to pick this as a topic to do. But I also just thought it was really interesting because at the very end they make the note that in the 60s or 70s, I should probably have a look and remember exactly who it is, there is a man who is recorded as the first black police officer in England. Oh, there we go, Norwell Roberts. That was in 1967, and he received a medal in 1996. However, when you look back at a historical record, there are probably 4 other people who have been seen as black and also working for the police force. So there was Robert Bramford, who joined the Met Police in 1838. There was John Kent, who was a British-born black constable in 1835. And then it also goes back to the fact that in the Old Bailey records for the year 1746, Thomas Latham was described as a Negro constable. So again, we're going back over 250 years, yet the guy from the 1900s is the one who was seen as the first black police officer, which just goes to show about how much in the historical record people just don't know, and that was something that I didn't know, and so I found that to be quite interesting. I then kind of accidentally was having a look at the other books that I have on my 25 and 2025, and I have the Dual which looks at language, and again the kind of coincidentalness of reading these books at the same time, because I've got so much more time than I kind of thought I have for this video. I know I'm going to pick up A Drop of Corruption next, but I was just thinking I actually would like to pick up some more non-fiction before the year closes out, and so I started this one. I bought it in 2023. I have the original receipt in here which tells me when I purchased it, which was the 15th of November 2023, and so it specifically looks at Old English and the bestiaries of the time period. It looks at the kind of words and how actually Old English is not always that different from current present day English. For example, Old English for the Holy Spirit was Halagast, which does sound like Holy Ghost, and there were quite a few others that are kind of really just, they make sense when you look at them. It also looks obviously at the contemporary context in which those words were used, so it's looking at a lot of biblical Old English text and also just Old English documents essentially, and so it is obviously very centred in medieval English Christianity, but it just provides you with a bit of context, and specifically in the context of looking at animals. It looks at the ordinary animals, so cows, spiders, eagles, and then the next section I'm about to start moves on to those which are the extraordinary. That's things like the elephant, for example. There are also other sections where we look at animals seen as good, animals seen as bad, animals that are baffling, so those kind of monstrous creatures that you would see in all these different texts. And I just, again, it was unintentional that I picked this up, or that I had this at least, and I'm reading it in conjunction with this because it obviously shows you a lot about the etymology of words, and it just has me reflecting a lot on this. And so I'm kind of glad that I did wait 3 years to read this, because it kind of feels like everything is aligned for me to read it in conjunction with other things that are tangentially related. Like I said, I am going to pick up A Drop of Corruption. I just want to have something that's non-fiction I can also dip in and out of over the next couple of weeks. I don't think it's going to take me that long to get through, but that is the plan, and I'm hoping to start again on A Drop of Corruption tonight. I read about 50 pages when I picked it up the first time, so I'm hoping to just so I'm hoping to just slip into it and make a start on that. I did read a little bit more of the Dior Hoard yesterday, but more importantly, I did make a proper start on A Drop of Corruption. I ended up getting about 160 pages in. We obviously have Din and Anna. They are a detective duo, and they are investigating another crime. The thing about these crimes is that they seem impossible. There is a magical element to them. I obviously don't want to reveal too much about things that happen in the first book, but the different characters in this world are enhanced in a specific way. And so Din, for example, is an engraver, which means that he can sniff his scents, and he perfectly remembers everything. And you can get things like special speed, memory, all of these different things, and that obviously plays a role in him being able to understand things in this detective world. And so they're investigating a murder of a treasury man, and I read the first 50 pages when I started it the other night, and it took me a minute to get into it, but I feel like that happened the same with the first book. I think it's an easy read once you get started, but there is a lot going on in this world, and I think that even in this one, because it had been a year and a half-ish since I read the first one, I was having to try and remember elements of information that I couldn't quite remember because it had been a while. I do hope that we will learn more about the Leviathans in this world, because that's a big thing that happens in this world that we only got a little bit of on in the first book, where there are essentially these big Leviathan creatures out at sea, and they occasionally come up and attack the land, and we do have a little bit of information about them in here, where we find out that they are using their resources for specific things. So I'm hoping we'll expand on that a bit more, because I think that's one thing about this world that I would really like to know more about. Other than that, it's getting into the swing of things now that they're fully involved in the investigation, and they've realised that there's definitely some specific things happening. These are fairly light-hearted in that Anna and Din are very much a Sherlock and Watson kind of duo, where Anna is a little bit bonkers and Din is the one who kind of goes around and does a lot of the dirty work, but Anna's got a brilliant mind, and that's part of the reason why she does what she does. And there's obviously a whole other things at play as well, but I can't get into too much, even though I'm famous for spoiling things, because this is obviously a sequel. I'm going to read some more tonight, because I would really like to make some headway and progress with it now that I'm invested, and I'm curious to see what happens next. And then I'm aiming to read a little bit more non-fiction. I'm kind of doing a segment a night. So yesterday I did the extraordinary creatures, which was like an elephant, an ant, and then tonight is the good animals, and those who are portrayed as good in all the medieval texts. So I know lines there, I'm not sure what else, but I'll soon find out. Please forgive the background noise, I do not have much time today, so I will be filming this update very quickly. I finished A Drop of Corruption last night. I'm giving it 3.5. I do think that this was a good sequel. I think that it was a bit slower than the first book, and I think the novelty of the first book is probably what makes it the most interesting, whereas this one felt a little bit more slow as we were kind of weaving through what exactly was going on. We did get a lot more world building in this one. We learnt a lot more about aspects of the Leviathan, but I don't think we're going to get what I want because the Leviathan is a mystery to the people even in this world, and so I don't think we're necessarily going to get to experience all the different secrets. But we did learn, especially towards the end of the book, quite a big thing about something else that's going on, to do with the way that people are altered, and just the way that people are slightly different in this world, and the impact that kind of the Leviathan and those sorts of things have on the different people. And so I do think that we got a lot more world building in this book. I think it was done fairly well. I think, like I said, my main thing in this one is that it was just a bit slower, and so at times, even though I read through it fairly quickly, and where I left off, not last night because I finished it last night, the night before, I had got to a point where there was something quite dramatic happening, and so when we had that action, it moved fairly quickly, because obviously we're getting towards the climax of the book and revealing the secret, and there is a murderer on the loose. I think one of the people I kind of had guessed had an involvement in what was going on, and it felt like it was kind of a red herring at some points, but they maybe did have an involvement, but not quite the involvement that we maybe first assumed. And then there was another character that got exposed as to being a big part of what was going on, and yeah, I think that has a bit to play in why it was a 3.5 for me. I ultimately enjoyed the first book more, and I gave that 4, so this one is a 3.5. But again, I really enjoyed it still, and I will continue in the series. I managed to finish the Dior Hoard last night. I'm going to give it 3.5. I think that it is a very interesting book. I think that you do need to be interested in either etymology or medieval history. For me, it was the medieval history side, part of the reason why I picked this up is because I like creatures and obviously I've studied medieval history, and it was really nice reading this to have some kind of level of understanding of the specific historical sources that were being used, because I had used them in my own dissertation. There were historians referenced that I knew and that I quoted for work that I had done. And in the last section there was a whole kind of talk about the creatures that were not quite creatures but also partially human, which is basically what my dissertation was on. One of them being the cynocephaly, which I completely forgot to mention when I read Paladin's Faith in my last video. There's a cynocephaly creature in that book, like a dog-headed lady, and I can't believe I forgot to mention that when I did the video because I was obsessed. And so it was quite interesting. I do think that it is very much about words. It felt like a little bit that it was not bogging me down with information, but there was just so much information, and so it felt a little bit slow to get through at times, but I just read a little bit at a time, and then I managed to finish it. So definitely recommend if you are interested in language, words, those sorts of things, and maybe this one will be for you. I know that the author has another book as well that looks, it's called the Word Hoard, which looks at basically more daily life, and all of this started based off a blog that she wrote whilst she was studying, so I thought that was really interesting as well. I have my ebook of The Strength of the Few ready to go. I'm getting the train quite a few times this week for back and forth to work, so plenty of time to be reading on the train. But I also was thinking that, again, it's right now it's the 7th of December, so in my head when I was like, yeah, I'm gonna read these books before Christmas, I've read them a lot faster than I thought I would. So I was looking at my list and thought I might read another book or two, and so I decided to go for one that has been on that list for the longest time, or at least I've owned for the longest time, and that is In the Labyrinth of Drakes by Marie Brennan. This is the 4th book in the Memoirs of Lady Trent series, which follows a lady, Isabella Trent, who you follow her throughout her life essentially. The first book is how she got into dragon history because she's a dragon naturalist, which, you know, is literally me if I was in a fantasy world. Definitely that is the role that I'd be doing. And it follows her through her life essentially, and she's reflecting back on everything that's happened, the discoveries that she's made, the people that she's met. I really liked the first book. I gave it 5 stars. I read it in 2018, and I was pretty good in that I read the first in 2018, the second in 2019, and the third book in 2020. But the third book wasn't as good for me. It just felt like it was quite slow, and I felt like I kind of dipped a little bit in my interest of the series. Either way, I did go out and buy the rest. Oh, there's a black cat. Sorry, distracted. There was a cat. What was I saying? I did go back out and buy the rest of the series, literally a couple of years ago, because I knew that I wanted to finish the series, and every year since then I've been like, yeah, I'm gonna read the next book this year, and I haven't, and it's now been 5 years since I read the 3rd book in the series, and so I kind of feel like I need to pick it up because it's not that long of a book. It's about 300 and something, like just under 350 pages. It is fairly easy to read. I started it last night and I already got 80 pages in, and so it was, you know, it's not something that is difficult to read. I just need to pick it up and read it, and so I'm gonna make my way through this today. I think, to be honest, I probably could finish it today. It's a Sunday. I don't have anything else really to be doing. I have done what I needed to do already this morning, and so I would like to read this book and finally make more headway on finishing this series. I know that after this there is, I think, one final book in terms of Lady Trent's memoirs, and then there's another book as well, so I want to get to those really in the next few years, because I don't finish series, which is not very good of me. I'm just not very good at staying on top of that, so that's what I want to do. I was then thinking, oh, you know, maybe I'll call it quits after that. There's quite a few other books I want to read before the end of the year, and so I can, you know, say that I've read the majority of my 25 and 2025, and I'll say that's enough. And then I went through and counted how many books that I will have read once I finish The Strength of the Few and In the Labyrinth of Drakes, and it brings me up to 19. Which, if I'm going to do 20 books in 2026 next year, I feel like I just have to. Like, I don't want to leave it. Oh, I read 19 this year. I want to read 20 books this year. And so now I have to decide what other books I want to read. And I don't really know what to do. So these are the books that I have left. I'll pop it on the screen here. I've got it on my laptop. Lots of sequels. Obviously, like I said, I'm going to read In the Labyrinth of Drakes and The Strength of the Few, which leaves me with literally all sequels left to read and one non-fiction book. I don't really want to read the non-fiction because I have already read 2 non-fictions at the moment, and so I just want to take a break a little bit from non-fiction, which means I have to read one of the sequels. The Hunger of the Gods I'm going to save because I'm thinking about reading that for one of my D&D class videos, so it rules that one out. The Oleander Sword, I'm not super thrilled about reading at the moment. Like, I'm not drawn into it. I physically own it, and so, you know, I want to get around to it at some point, but I don't particularly want to read it just right now. And then we have On Vicious Worlds, A Perilous Undertaking, and The Bone Ship's Wake. In my head, A Perilous Undertaking would be the easiest to read because it's fairly light and easy to get through, compared to On Vicious Worlds and The Bone Ship's Wake, which are the second and third book in a series. But The Bone Ship's Wake is the third book in the series, and I do really like that series. And I have managed to, it will be the third year. If I read it now, I'll have read 1 book a year, and I will have finished the series in 3 years. And so part of me is like, I'm kind of leaning towards that one, but I don't know, because I'm allergic to finishing series. I don't know what it is. I just don't think I can do it. Like, my body just says, no, you can't finish a series. You just read it halfway through and then you abandon it and never go back to it ever. So I don't know, I haven't decided. I do own all of the books that I have left on the list that I was looking at reading, and so it's not like it'll be difficult for me to pick one up. I feel like in my heart I should read The Bone Ship's Wake, because I like the series. I've started R.J. Belker's other series, The Gods of the Weirdwood, and I read the first book of that 2 years ago. I got the second book and I was going to read it over last Christmas, and then I never did. And I also have the third book because I got the Broken Binding set, where they allocate you the same number in the series. So I have all 3 of the same print edition, if that makes sense. And so I own that series, and they're big chunky books, and I would like to get to those at some point as well. But really, like, I literally own Bone Ship's Wake. I picked it up because I had really enjoyed what I read from the first book. So really, I should read the book. And I think that's what makes the most sense, because if I finish in the Labyrinth of Drakes today, and then I've got Strength of the Few to read throughout the week, and then I've also got a physical book, it makes sense. Whereas I have the Veronica Speedwell book digitally as an ebook, and then and so I also have that for On Vicious Worlds as well. So I'm leaning towards The Bone Ship's Wake, but I don't know. I could change my mind. I could just say, hey, I'm reading Kinky History instead. I don't know. You'll find out at some point in the next series of clips, whatever choice it is that I make. And then I will have read 20 books in 2025, which I'm happy with. I think that is quite an achievement. I managed to get through quite a few in this video, which I wasn't really anticipating. I was like, yeah, I want to read A Strength of the Few, Babel, Black Victorians, and what was the other book? I've already forgotten. A Drop of Corruption. That was it. I was looking around to try and remember what I've read, and so the fact that I have managed to read those and more is pretty good, and it gives me a bit more confidence about hopefully reading the 20 in 2026 that I will read. Inevitably though, I won't, but at the very least it will make me feel better about going into that year having said that I'm reading 20 books instead of 26 in 2026. Also, it's a mouthful. I think maybe we should just not do that. I don't know. Okay, bye. It's been 3 hours. I've finished it. 3 hours to read a book that took me 5 years. I'm giving this 4 stars. I really enjoyed this one. I think it's a shame that I did wait so long to read it, because I think that reading it sooner after I had finished the third book would just give me more information about that links the 2 books together. I remember the first book fairly well. I gave that one 5 stars. It has stuck out to me for so long, and as part of the reason why I still wanted to continue in this series. I remember elements of book 2 and book 3, but there is a character in here who plays a very significant role who was in the previous book, and I didn't quite have the context in my head from the previous books that I would have if I'd have read this as like sooner, essentially. Either way, this one was really, I mean, I'm thinking back, I don't know what made the third book so difficult for me to get through. I just remember really struggling to read it, whereas this one was just so easy to read. Isabella is very stubborn. She's a woman in this fake Victorian era. The whole world is essentially you know, the Victorian world with different names. She's from Skierland. They have travelled to a place which is essentially the Middle East, and so it is very much just kind of like transposed like the values of people in society. She still struggles because she's a woman to have respect, and her travelling that she does with other men is viewed as suspicious because she is a woman, even though for a specific reason people are less kind of scandalised. I don't want to say that as it will spoil an earlier book. It still leads to some level of scandal, and she just has to kind of grin and bear it as she goes through. There is something that happened in here that was kind of pleasantly surprising, and I'm interested to see how that will impact the next book. I'm kind of glad that it happened because of something that happened in a previous book, and this is going to make no sense to anyone because you won't have read the series, but if you have, maybe you get what I mean. I think that it was a nice little thing that happened, a moment of happiness, and now I'm really looking forward to read the next book, which is the main book in the final series. I'm really curious as to what is going to happen in it. There are some really cool, interesting discoveries in this. It really focuses a lot around the breeding of dragons, because dragons are obviously also this they're a weapon for people, and so Isabella's involvement has always been about the dragons first, and her research first, and understanding and being a dragon naturalist, but obviously we have these other elements as well that happen. And yeah, I'm really curious now to see what happens in the next book, and I'm definitely picking it up next year. I will not be waiting 5 years before I read the next book. So I hope I can maybe finish the whole series next year and read the next 2 books, the final one here, and then I believe the final one is like Turning Light into Darkness. I don't know if it'll be in here. Depends on when this edition was published. Within the Sanctuary of Wings, I think, is the final one, and then the very last one is Turning Light into Darkness, I believe, something like that. I'm really glad that I decided to pick this up and read it. I feel quite accomplished and it's literally not even 5 o'clock yet, so I managed to really just fly through this. Like I said, I'm definitely gonna make headway with the rest of the series early next year, hopefully now, which means that I am up to 18 books on my 25 and 2025. I probably will start a little bit of The Strength of the Few tonight, so that when I'm reading it on the train, I'm not just immediately thrust into the confusion of what happens in that book. I do know that there is a video online that someone made that was like recapping The Will of the Many, and although I remember most of the things that happened, I'm wondering if I should maybe watch a little bit of that to see if there's anything I need refreshing on, and then that way I can dig straight into The Strength of the Few this week. And am I going to read The Bone Ship's Wake? It's watching me right here. I should do it. I really should do it. How many pages is it? Oh, it's over 500 pages. Ooh, but it's the last book in the series. I should do it. I think I'm gonna have to do it. Yeah, I think it's gonna have to be this one, because I'll be quite mad at myself if I didn't. So I will check in whenever I read a bit of whichever one is first that I pick up. I'm officially 143 pages into The Bone Ship's Wake. I filmed a clip for this the other day and I just scrapped it because I was like, ugh. But I've had a bit of a slow start to this one, and it's really interesting because obviously with The Strength of the Few, I've read that pretty much almost just after it comes out. Like I've been reading it, and it's pretty much a month after the release date, and so I had a full year and a half really, because I read it in February of 2024, to forget things that happened in the book. But I did remember quite a bit, and I watched a lot of that. I watched that full 2-hour clip on 2 times speed, say, that would refresh things that happened. And for the most part, I did remember a lot of things, and I think it would have come back to me when I was reading the book. But compared to this, where I read the last book probably summertime or September time last year, I remembered next to nothing. I started it and I was like, wait, what's going on? And I had to go back and read a little bit of the final part of the second book to try and remember what exactly had happened the last time I read it. And as I've got further in, things are starting to come back to me. But it's really interesting the difference between them, where I've just really forgot a lot of what had happened. And so it has been quite slow because I feel like I've been trying to just navigate what's going on. It helps that this is a very kind of character driven book. Like where they're at, there are nearly 150 pages in, and we have a little bit of context about something that's happened in the previous book because someone has gone, well, not gone missing, they've been kidnapped. And so our main character, Joron, is making it his mission to find where she is. And pretty much, I mean, they are on boats, they are sailing on these boats, and for the 150 pages it's been a lot about how he is essentially leading the people on the ship. They're trying to escape people who are after them, and that's pretty much it. And the first book I found similarly that in a way not a lot happens. Like I remember reading the first book really distinctly thinking in the first 100 pages, what is going on here? Because it was just, it's such unique world building, but it is very slow paced, I think, and because it's in such a contained space, you are seeing a lot of the day in day out kind of same sort of thing because they're on a ship for the majority of the book. And so we're at that point where at the moment they are still, well, that maybe making landfall in a short period of time, but there is still a whole load of things to happen considering this is, I think, yeah, it's over 500 pages, so I've still got, you know, another 400 pages essentially before the book ends and the series ends. And so what is going to happen in this, I don't know. There's overarching things that are going on, and there's a prophecy, and we have things with Joron as well, and so I am interested to see how it's going to finish. I do think I probably should have picked it up a bit sooner, to give myself more context for what exactly happened in the last book, but I do think it's a really unique series. The concept of dragons in this world is a little bit different. People use dragon bones to it's basically a hot commodity. They use it for their ships, but dragons basically have kind of vanished, but they come back, and there is a lot of interest in what exactly is going on with the dragons, why they might have come back, and you know, the war and politics that go on between these different groups of people. I am going to continue to make my way through this. I'm also 60 something percent into The Strength of the Few. There is just so much that is going on in that book. It's really hard to explain unless you have read the first book. I do think that it is good. There is various different kind of arc storylines, as I said, and I think that I still do have an attachment to that original plotline. But the other two have other stakes that are growing, and there's some sorts of crossover that is quite interesting. I think this is a series where, again, it is so complex, and like I watched that overview of the first book, and I know a lot of the things that are happening, but at the same time I'm like, these terms, they're throwing me a little bit. I watched a bit of an interview the other day where they said it where the author said it was going to be 4 books total, and I'm kind of at the point now where probably by the end of this book I think we'll probably see a kind of more overarching storyline, because I can see the kind of, there's a short-term goal in this book for one character. The other two don't quite have that same goal yet, if that makes sense. If you've read the book, I think you probably understand what I mean. And so I guess it's obviously going to be continuing through that. I am going to be really interested to see how the series plays out, I think. Yesterday I finished The Strength of the Few, and I'm giving it 4 stars. I think this series is going to be a complicated one. There's obviously little I can say without getting into too many spoilers about what actually happens in the series. But as I said, we're kind of following these 3 storylines. And I do think that while it could be confusing, the storylines, how to explain this? The things that are confusing, I think, are just the things within the stories themselves. There is a thread that follows through each of these storylines, which I think makes sense. There is an end goal kind of in sight, but each obviously storyline is following at its own pace. Again, I think there is an attachment, or at least I felt like there was a strong attachment to the main storyline that kind of feeds on from what was in the first book, but I found myself really liking one of the other storylines as well, and it's really interesting how we kind of are getting aspects of other ancient cultures. Obviously the first book and the main kind of mythology and everything that the hierarchy is based upon is ancient Rome, but we're getting aspects of what feels like ancient Egypt, and also like the Celts, and kind of ancient England. That's not quite the way it is worded, but you know what I mean. And so I think those aspects as well are quite interesting, and that kind of like Celtic side has been I found to be quite an interesting thread. I do think that the first book this is so much more political than the first book, but the first book was also very political, but I think that the politics was kind of weaved in amongst the heavy schooling aspects and the kind of academy aspect, and so it's a lot easier to read that book than I think it is to read this book. Like, this book is, I think, quite a bit to wrap your head around, but I do think that it is really interesting what is being done with this series, and I'm really curious as to see what's going to happen as the series goes on. There are kind of, I guess, three big reveals towards the end of the book that happen in kind of each of the main threads. They are quite interesting, and if the last line means what I think it does, then very interesting indeed. That'll be a nice little treat when it comes to the next book in the series, but obviously that's another year away at least, and so I am definitely going to continue in this series. I'm also a good chunk of the way through The Bone Ship's Wake. I have read about 100 or so pages this evening so far. I'm hoping to kind of try and finish it. I don't know whether I'll film my update tonight or whether I'll leave it till tomorrow, probably tomorrow morning, because I don't have to be at an event until a little bit later. But I really do want to finish this tonight because things are picking up and there is a climax that is definitely happening. I do think that this series is almost best read back to back, each book, because each book is a continuation straight from where we left off, and I know that is the same for most books, but sometimes there's like a time jump, or sometimes, you know, you're in a completely different place and things are a bit different, but these books basically do follow on from one another, and the relationships and everything that happen within these books, I think, just mean so much more when you probably are reading them in quite quick succession. So if you are reading this series, or you plan to read this series, don't do what I do or did and wait a year between reading each of the books. Things are definitely kind of coming to a climax, and the one thing about this series in particular is that the world building is just so unique, I think, and I love a bit of world building. That is just, that's the sort of thing that really interests me. It's the sort of thing that I really love seeing, and how in-depth these things are in books, and so I definitely recommend it in that sense. I have felt, like I said, a little bit of a struggle getting through this. I'm reading it fine, but I definitely think probably it would have been easier for me to read this after the other books, as I said. So I don't know what my rating's going to be at the moment. I'm probably sitting on maybe like a 3.5, which I gave both the other books 4, and generally as a series I probably say that the series would be a 4, but I don't feel like I'm enjoying this book as much as I enjoyed at least the first book. I think the first book is probably my favourite because there is just so much introduction to everything and all of these characters that kind of continue throughout this whole series, and so I think that was probably my favourite, and in theory you could just read that as a standalone, but yeah, that's where I am with this one. So I'm gonna spend the rest of the evening reading it, hopefully finishing it, and I'll see you in the morning probably with my next update, because your girl's tired, so I'm heading straight to bed after I finish this. Good morning. I did in fact finish The Bone Ship's Wake last night, and I have to eat my word because I've ended up giving it 4 stars. The ending was quite emotional. I think it's because there is such a as I said, like especially the second and the third book, I think kind of flow really well into each other in terms of you should probably read them back to back, just because a lot of the things that happen in the second book are continued through into what happens into book 3, and we get to quite a dramatic climax, which kind of brings together the end of the story. I do think there's a few like story things which I feel like I have like lingering questions about, which I think is what it's for, and I think that this book was definitely the slowest book of the 3, in that the first book is pretty much setting up the world, and it is a slow start in that one, but you were really getting to know everything that happens, and book 2 is pretty action-packed and is a little bit different, whereas the book 3, the first, I would say almost 200 pages are really quite slow, and we know what the goal is in these 200 pages, but it just feels like we're taking a very long time to get there. And so, you know, it is a 500 plus page book, nearly 550 pages, I think. I don't know whether it maybe needed to be that long. And so that in that sense, I still think it's probably not as, if all of them are 4 stars, I still think probably books 1, 2, 3 in that order is the order that I would put them in. But I do think that the ending worked. I think it had a good send off to the series. And that brings me to the end of this video, because I have read 20 of my 25 in 2025. It's really funny because yesterday I was putting together some more books on the list that I want to read next year, and I resolutely said it's 20 in 2026, and then I was like, oh, there's a few more books I would like to read, and then I was like, I could do 22, but then if I'm doing 22, what's to say I don't just make it 26? So at the minute it's 20-ish books that I will be reading in 2026. It's mostly because if it doesn't look cute on the infographic, I'm going to try and make it as even as possible. So if that means I have to add more books, then so be it. You'll see at some point in the next few weeks what decision I have made. But in the meantime, I hope everyone has happy holidays. Today is the 15th. The day that I've finished filming this, the 15th of December, which is coincidentally 1 year since I posted my first video. So I think that that kind of feels like a nice end to all of this. See you later.